Chapter 1 is going to deal with a lot of data and statistics. And hopefully you should have some general knowledge on almost everything we talk about. But we are really going to look more in depth on getting good at reading our types of graphs and how to use data a little bit further than what you're used to. Okay, so just that kind of review of some things that you should know. Remember, data is just like a collection of information, and usually we collect it in a real-world situation. And we're going to look at 3 types of ways we can graph that data. The first one we're going to look at is called a pictograph. Right? It's almost like a bar graph, but we're using pictures to represent it. And then we will do a bar graph. And then finally, dot plots. And these are also known as line plots. Our book simply calls it dot plots because we actually use dots to plot rather than X's or something else. But you'll see what I mean when I get to that. So the first thing, dot plot, or a pictograph. I have some data up here. This is taken randomly from some company finding the birthdays from their staff members from the first 4 months of the year. Okay? And this is kind of nice to do a pictograph because anything like if you have something that you can almost draw a picture, whether it's like number of cars or just some object where you can draw pictures, in this case we have people, a pictograph is kind of useful and makes it more interesting to look at. And the one thing I noticed about all 3 of my numbers is that these are all multiples of 5. That's going to be important when we look at our pictograph, because we don't want to draw a ton of pictures. So here is the pictograph of that data. So the one thing about all of our graphs should have a nice title to it that's very descriptive. So this title up here says number of birthdays in each month. Okay, number of birthdays specifically to each month, right? That's a good title. And all graphs, no matter what they are, should all have labels. So here's my labels over on the side, and it states birth month, and then it has all 4 of the months that we're looking at. And now, for the pictograph, we use pictures to look at it. So let's kind of look more in depth. Right now, when I look at this, if I just glance at it, it looks like there's 3 birthdays in January, 2 in February, and 5 in April. But that's not true. Look at my data. I had 15 in January, 10 in February, and 25 in April. So sometimes there needs to be a key on your graph to specify how these numbers work. So if you look down here, each person that's drawn represents 5 students. So I look at January, this is really 5 students, 5 more students, 5 more students. So it's really 3 times 5. That's where that 15 comes from. Okay, so you just got to be careful when you read graphs. Always look to see if there's a key. So in this case, and keys are usually found in the bottom right corner. Okay, so that's one thing to make note of. Look for keys. Look for keys on graphs, right? Don't just start looking at the graph. Find those first just in case. So in this case, February was 10 because 5 and 5. 0 for March, and 25, right? Because 5 times 5. All right. Next on to the bar graph, which is very similar to our pictograph. So we're going to use the same information, except we're just going to use bars instead of people. Okay? So if you look here, if you take a look at our bar graph, right? We got a nice title again up top. We have some nice labels. Now with bar graphs, you're going to have labels for your x-axis. So here's a nice label down here. Birth month, and then you specify which months we're looking at. And then over here, number of students, there's another great label for our y-axis. And then it's always good to have a proper scale. So in this case, we're going from 0 to 25. It's always nice to find your minimum and your maximum of your data, because then it helps you find your scale. So we're going from 0 to 25. So really, I should probably count by 5s, right? I could count by 10s, but then I hardly have any numbers on my scale. And I don't want to count by 1s because that means I'm going to have 25 dashes. So counting by 5s is much easier. Instead, you notice on the y-axis they counted by 5s. And then the bar should represent how high. So in January, 15. In February, 10. In March, 0. So there's no bar. And in April, 25. Okay, so hopefully these should be kind of familiar to you. The one that might be new, but hopefully you have some reference to it, is a dot plot. Okay, and also, like I said, also known as a line plot. So let's just read through our information. It says, Angelica has taken her pulse 11 times in the last 6 hours. Her results are 69, 92, 64, 78, 88, blah, blah, blah. Okay, beats per minute. It says find the maximum, minimum, and range of the data. Okay, and then we'll make a dot plot of that afterwards. I know it doesn't state it here, but we always want to make one to help us visualize some things. And so before you even make the dot plot or the line plot, it's always nice to find these three things. To find the minimum, the maximum, and the range. This will be useful, and I'll show you why. So what is the minimum? Well, let's look through it. See, 69 is pretty low. Nope, 64 is even lower. Anything smaller than 64? Nope, there we go. So the minimum is 64 beats per minute. Maximum would be, let's see, I got a 92. I'm looking left to right. Oh, 93 is bigger, so 93. For the range means like basically max minus the min. The biggest minus the smallest. It's the range of numbers. Where are they from? Well, it goes from 64 to 93. So what I do is I subtract those two numbers, so 93 minus 64, and that gives me what? 29. So our range is 29, from 64 to 93. All right, so now when we make our dot plot, and it's nice to think of it as a line plot just because what you do is you start by making a number line. So make a nice big number line. And why finding the min and max is so important is that what you want to do, you don't want to just start at 0 all the time or put 0 in the middle. Okay, and look at your data. What do you have? What are you using here? In this case, my first number is 64, right? And I'm going to 93. So one thing you can think about, should I just start with 64 right here? You don't want to start just by the minimum every time. You want to figure out what you want to count by first. So we want to kind of think about what type of intervals should we make. This is one of our terms, intervals. What type of intervals? Well, that's really, in essence, what our scale is going to be. So what should we count by? Should we count by 2s, 4s, 5s, 10s? Well, the range is 29. So if I count by 10s, you know, it's kind of like 29 divided by 3, or divided by 10. That's only like 3 dashes. So I don't want just 3 dashes. That won't be very nice to plot some data. So if you want to do something where you're going to get at least, 5 to 10 dashes on this guy, so what I would probably do is count by 5s in this case, right? Because 29 divided by 5 is almost 6. It's just under 6, approximately. So that should give us some dashes. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to start since 64. I got to go below that, so I'm going to go to 60. That's where I'm going to start. And 93, I'm going to go just above that, so 95. And count by 5. So 60 is my first dash. And I can make smaller dashes in this case because my range isn't too big. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 65. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 70. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 75. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 80. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 85. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 90. To extend this just a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 95. So now we're going to do just what it describes. We're going to make dots for every plot, for every piece of data. So I just go through. I start with my first one. 69. I make a dot at 69, right above it. So there's my dot. Some books will use X's. We're going to use dots for this book. And I might even cross it out just so I know that I use it. And then I go to 92. Right above 92, cross it out, 64. Dot right above that. These should all be in line with each other, these 3 dots so far, because they're kind of my first dot on it. 78. So I just kind of keep going through 80. Oh, I don't want to put that up there. I'm all to kind of line up. 80s right there. 82. 86. 93, 75, 80. Oh, there's another 80. So what should I do if there's another, more than one number? Put it right above. And 80. There we go. So now we should be able to tell with our dot plot how many of each. I can tell I got 164, 169, so on and so forth. And I really have 3 80s, right? Okay, so it's just kind of another way to organize our data. So what you're going to do on your assignment is you're going to look at all 3 of these ways, and you're going to answer some questions depending on what type of graph you're given. Just make sure that you always look for keys and just the nuances of the graph. So just be careful as you go through. Always reread things. Just like I said, just be very careful as you read and look at your graphs.